So the refuge and bodhicitta prayer is something that we say quite a lot, potentially, often at the start of many of the practices that we do, and we just might do it at certain points throughout our day to reorient ourselves. And there's often the instruction given to repeat it 3 times. And I find that quite helpful because depending on the mind that I bring to my practice, it takes me a bit just to settle down and be present. And especially if we're doing it in a group situation, my mind might be somewhere else. So doing it 3 times gives us the chance to actually really connect and potentially say it once with a mind that's really present. But recently I read a teaching from Alex Berzin drawing on some of the 5th Dalai Lama's Lamrim presentation that took the idea of reciting it 3 times to a different level that I hadn't heard before. So I wanted to share that because I find it really inspiring. So the advice is to actually break the prayer down into 2. So you have the refuge aspect and then the bodhicitta aspect, and then you recite each aspect separately 3 times. So with the first repetition, so I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha until I reach enlightenment. Recite that 3 times. And on the first recitation, you imagine that you've gone to the worst rebirth or the most hellish suffering situation possible. And you then recognize that the 3 jewels provide a pathway out of that suffering, and you take refuge. On the second recitation, and the analogy that they use is you've fallen off the cliff. You've just fallen smack down, you see the suffering there. And then the second recitation is that you imagine that you're just about to fall. You're on the edge of the cliff and you're teetering. And you can see the imminent suffering that's about to happen. And so again, you take refuge, recognizing that the 3 jewels provide a pathway out of that suffering. And on the third recitation, you see yourself being quite far away from the edge of the cliff, but you're sliding there. And the idea is that we have this karma that can ripen, we don't know when, but it will ripen in that suffering that we're trying to avoid. So again, even from this more comfortable position of not being at the edge of the cliff, further away, but we see that we're being pushed there by our karma. So we take refuge again. And then we take that situation of the having fallen off the cliff, falling off the cliff, and being sliding towards the cliff, and we apply it to others with the 3 recitations of the bodhicitta aspect. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, may I attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. So we take someone, a group of people. I think that's a bit more tangible than taking all sentient beings as this big mass, but zoning in on 1 or 2 people or a group of people and imagining them in some state of suffering, about to fall into some state of suffering or sliding towards some state of suffering. And then generating the wish for them to be free of that, and then generating bodhicitta, the wish to attain enlightenment, to be able to help them to be permanently free from such states of suffering. I found that quite an amazing presentation to really engage my mind in these 3 recitations and to really develop a multifaceted, a multidimensional heart of refuge and bodhicitta. That I think could really take the whole session itself, just engaging in that reflection. And I really want to think about this a bit more. But one thing that I found quite useful in this presentation is not necessarily to do as Alex described, but using it to kind of see different levels of my own mind and my own practice. So I found myself wanting to see certain aspects of myself where I feel like I've fallen. And fallen can have a bit of a Christian connotation or irredeemable aspect to it, but the feeling that I get in my heart is more like, wow, I see that with these afflictions I'm completely overwhelmed. I can see vividly the suffering that I'm experiencing, and I need help. I need serious help to get myself out of this. And I can see that most clearly in my own practice in terms of the afflictions of attachment and jealousy. I see that very quickly I get triggered, or I don't have the strong tools yet, and I'm just suddenly overwhelmed by them, and the immediate suffering and the suffering in the future that will come from acting in these ways or thinking in these ways is really tangible. Day to day, I can see that. And so I can really see that I need help, and with the bit of the taste that I've had of the effectiveness of the Buddha's teachings, I can see that that's a reliable, safe direction to take, a reliable refuge to help me overcome this suffering, this feeling overwhelmed, this feeling like I've fallen off the cliff of these. And then I can see other states where the afflictions aren't quite so strong. So this would be more anger and attachment to praise and blame for me. I'm not so easily overwhelmed by them, but I feel often that I'm teetering, where I've got some wherewithal to recognize it more quickly than the other afflictions. If I'm not guarding my mind quite firmly, then I can fall off the cliff and be overwhelmed. So I can see that, like, those ones is that second level of, I still need a lot of help here, but I do have some tools, but I need help. And then with the third recitation, I found it helpful to recognize, look at myself where I feel like I'm not quite, I'm a bit further away from the cliff. And I see that in terms of my privileged situation of, I live in precepts, I live in a monastery, I live in a loving community that supports me in my practice, but I have all this karma from having done everything in previous lives that if I don't keep practicing, I'm going to slide off the cliff. So that helps me not fall into a sense of complacency, and also to have the awareness of, I don't know what I've done in previous lives, and any new obstacle, affliction, hindrance could arise and take me by surprise. So there's no time that I can relax and get complacent and forget my situation of being in cyclic existence. And then, yeah, that seems a quite a balanced way to look at my situation, to see where I struggle, where I've made progress in my practice, but then to frame it in the overall situation of, no matter what happiness I have here, I'm still in samsara, and I need to remember that and keep practicing. And then to also then turn that to others, to see, so I think it's especially easy when, for those that we're close to, we live with, or that we've grown up with, we can see their weaknesses, where they struggle. We can see where they're more steady but still have some problems. And we can see their good qualities and the great situations they're in, but then to still frame that within their encyclic existence, and that no matter how happy or good set of circumstances that they have, they still need our help. They still need the Buddha's help. They still need to free themselves from a mind that's overpowered by afflictions and karma. And so then the heart of bodhicitta can arise in relation to that as well. Yes, I found this just, I stumbled upon it on a teaching that was unrelated to what I was looking for, but it was just like, wow, this is something quite amazing, and I want to experiment with it more, and hopefully you find it useful too.